Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in or signing in or listening to this stream if you're online. It's 7:30 p.m. here in Sydney on the 10th of February. Oh, it's my mum's birthday. Happy birthday, Mum. I'll give you a phone call after this stream. I don't think my mum's on Twitch, but that'd be interesting if she was tuning in. So, what is my plan for today? I am going to do some accessibility testing. I find accessibility testing is one of the, I'd say, low-hanging fruits of a type of testing that testers can utilize to find easy to find bugs. It's not too hard to find accessibility bugs. Your biggest challenge is when you do find these bugs is convincing people to put enough time aside to fix it, on top of all the other feature development and all the other fixes and everything else that needs to happen. So it can be challenging to get accessibility looked at and to get people to put in effort to fixing accessibility. So, in a nutshell, I have the accessibility web standards here, the W3C. Your projects can get... Oh, excuse me. I'm drinking a beer at the moment. It's a Tasmanian Saison. It is very nice. It's just a little gassy, so it's making me burp a little bit. So, if you can hear me burp, it's because of some nice Tassie beer. I'm originally from Tasmania. It's a lovely state, but I've been living now in Sydney for about 5 years. I'm getting a little off topic. But anyway, the W3C standards, you can get your products and services audited to a particular standard. I don't think it's too hard to pass an audit, and usually the suggestions are pretty easy fixes. Sometimes there could be more complicated stuff that you might need to investigate how to fix, but I'm going to go through some low-hanging fruit approaches to testing and a couple of Chrome extensions that you can use to help with accessibility testing. Now, why is accessibility important? There's a bunch of reasons. It's generally a good thing. You want your websites to be accessible to all manner of people, no matter what type of abilities they have. And not that I'm trying to put forward lawsuit-driven development, but if your sites aren't particularly well set up for accessibility, sometimes you can get sued. There was what was recently CBA, which is a Commonwealth Bank of Australia, got sued recently for not having accessibility Albert court case for not having their buttons on their terminals accessible by blind people. So this payment terminal, when you go into a cafe or whatnot and you see this thing here, people with vision impairments, there's no audio feedback on how to put in their PIN. So basically, if you were vision impaired, you'd have to basically tell the cashier the PIN. If you were entering a PIN, I guess it's a good thing there's PayPass here these days. But so yeah, you probably don't want to get sued. But it is generally a good thing. There's a whole bunch of other benefits for having improved accessibility too. There's generally your search engine optimization, your SEO score tends to increase too. Your code is usually a bit easier to maintain as well. You have less technical debt as well. And I think there were some other It's not just people with disabilities who appreciate accessibility features. People who are a bit older, also if you're building an app for truck drivers and they have big fingers, having big buttons that are easy to press, which could be considered an accessibility feature, is really important. So you don't want to have tiny buttons that are hard to press. It encourages device independence. It's usually better for mobile web design as well. It increases your target demographic, so you can get more customers if you have accessible products. And there's a bunch of other benefits other than preventing your ass getting sued. So, there's a whole bunch of tools out there when you're doing accessibility testing. Usually the first thing you can look for is alt text for images. It's just alternative text for images. So if in your HTML code you have image equals whatever the image is, and then you have this alt tag, which is what screen readers will read out. So if someone can't really see that image, their screen reader still says the same thing. So they are not losing any information by not being able to see. There is a Chrome extension called Funkify. It's a disability simulator. And I'm just going to use it on Google search. I'll just go back to google.com. And this is the Google homepage. We're going to simulate blurry vision. So if I actually take my glasses off, I am short-sighted, and if I take my glasses off, I'm at about minus 1.75, maybe minus 2, depending on which eye you look at. And already with my glasses off, I can't read what's in the corner, though I can guess it is about, and I couldn't read the store bit, so I actually had to go closer to the screen to be able to see that one. So I'm going to put my glasses back on, and we're going to simulate blurry Bianca vision. So yeah, 60% of your audience generally wear glasses, and that is a visual aid that we tend to use. So if we do about my vision, actually I don't think my vision's quite, I don't know. I'm not too sure how this scale works, if it's the same as the glasses. But yeah, you can't really see the about and store very well, and I was having trouble reading that with my glasses off. That gets pretty hard to read. Yep. I can hardly see anything. So people having blurry vision is pretty common. I'm short-sighted. I can't really read screens all that well if I don't have my glasses on. And that can be an interesting thing to simulate. So we'll stop doing the blurry vision. Colour. So Carl here has colour blindness. It impacts men more than women. I think colour blindness, it generally comes in on the Y chromosome. So that's why more men generally have it. Grayscale is actually very uncommon. Red-green colour blindness is actually the most common one. Almost, I was going to say 1 in 20 blokes, but that's 5%. Have that type of colour blindness. And this stat is actually a little bit higher. It's a bit more than 1 in 20. But it's highly likely that you know someone with some mild form of colour blindness. And unless they've gone through a test with the military or something, they probably aren't really aware that they have colour blindness. I worked with someone in a deli who had colour blindness, and he basically didn't know until he tried to get into the, he wanted to be a sparky electrician. So he went to the school and did the color blindness test, and they're like, "Oh, you have red-green color blindness. You can't be an electrician, because cut the wrong wire or whatnot." But yeah, he didn't know until that point, and I think the only way it impacted him working in the deli is sometimes when you have like the bacon on the tray, and if it's been sitting there and exposed to the light, it starts to go grey. Basically, he couldn't tell just by looking at bacon if it looked like it'd been sitting there for too long. So basically, it makes it hard to tell the difference between fresh bacon and old bacon. But yeah, it's pretty easy to live through life and not realize you have red-green color blindness. It's usually the easiest one. One in 100 men. For red-green color blindness. Green weak is just where you can't quite distinguish green as much, and that impacts more people. Whereas the red-green variety is slightly rarer. Grayscale. Completely no color is quite rare. Apparently only, I don't know how that one's different. Oh, slight color difference. Okay. Oh, so it's a slightly different color blindness. Blue-yellow color blindness and blue-yellow. Okay. Yep. But weak greenness is surprisingly common. You probably know someone who has this type of color blindness, and they might not even know that they have it. It's always good to do a contrast test with your images. Grayscale is the best one for testing that contrast. You want to check that if your images are in grayscale, no information is lost. There's been a couple of times I've done some grayscale testing on some of the emails I sent out or some of the images I've used, and I've realized that there wasn't quite enough contrast with the colors I was using for me to be happy with how I was communicating. But, oh well, I didn't test it until after I'd sent out the email, and but yeah, doing a quick grayscale testing. It's one of those things that's pretty easy to do on mobile as well. There's usually shortcuts. I have accessibility shortcuts switched on by default on my phone because I generally do a lot of mobile testing. And it's just one of those things you just switch on every now and again just to see how it goes. Again, if you have some of these bugs, it's probably easy to get a designer on board to help fix those ones rather than a developer on board. If you go to a developer and go, hey, the contrast on this image is not that great, they're like, oh, I have all this other stuff to do, just add it to the backlog and I'll get around to it. Whereas if you tell a designer that, oh, this image here doesn't quite have the best grayscale contrast, they're like, oh, thanks, I'll fix that pretty quick. So we'll stop the grayscale stuff. We have Dyslexia Danny, which will scramble the letters. I think there's two different types of simulator here. So you can see here, this is mixing the letters around quite a fair bit. It's not actually doing it for the buttons, but it is doing it for the labels. I don't know why it's not doing it for the buttons. I'm going to read about Dyslexic Danny. Have you ever read something in a foreign language? Then you've experienced how much a struggle a text can be. Most people have heard of dyslexia, but it can be a bit hard to understand. It's different for a lot of people, and it can be quite complex. Some people describe the letters switching places, creating movement on the screen. So this is emulating that. Sometimes it feels like the letters are moving around, which it can be quite hard to do a lot of reading. So if we pause that I think a lot of people tend to assume that dyslexia is just getting the letters mixed up, so that, you know, the word is about, but you actually look at it like this. Whereas before I used this simulator, I didn't realize there was a type of scrambling type of dyslexia where it feels like letters move about, and that can be quite confusing. It'd be quite hard to read a paragraph if your brain was not being able to make those connections very well. We have Trembling Trevor. So it can be very hard to click on. That store button is actually quite large. Did I click on it? Okay. Yeah. I'll go back. And you know, with older people, it's pretty common to develop a motor impairment. The stat here is saying about 12%, so that's not an insignificant amount. You probably have someone in your family with shaky fingers, and it's not just an old person condition either. Let's dial down the trembling a little bit to something a bit more mild. Even then, I mean, like, you should be able to build your websites without having to rely on being able to click very precisely. So because these buttons here are quite large, they're not too bad. Trembling Trevor can actively click on those things even when he's got some of the shakes there. I'll stop that one. So partial vision loss. So tunnel Toby would be considered legally blind, but he's just got tunnel vision. So it's like if you grabbed a toilet roll and put it against your eye and just had a look around the site. So you want to layer your information so that someone with tunnel vision doesn't have to, like if you had a web form and there was a large gap in between the field and the confirm or the error message, then Tunnel Toby has to do a lot of extra scanning to be able to process the information. It just, and this is not a large amount of vision loss. Where imagine having just a small amount like this, like just trying to be able to see what's happening. That's interesting. So peripheral Pierre is basically the opposite of Tunnel Toby. He's unable to focus on the center. There's just this gap. And it just means you have to read more out of the corner of your eye. It does look like it's combined with blurry vision as well. That's an interesting one. So elderly Ellen, she's got low vision, she's got blurry vision, but she also has trembling hands. And the thing is, everyone's going to get older at some point. We're all slowly dying. I would love the internet to be accessible and fully usable by the time I get old. But yeah, having blurry vision and shaky hands would make using the internet quite hard. Like for example, that button's actually got the Google search button's got a very large click. Where's the, okay, so I can, but the vision is eventually going to have to go. Okay, so you can adjust this to maybe do not so much trembling. Contrast. Okay, so that's a way to get high contrast. Yeah, and you can adjust the trembling. So So it's just a little bit. Sunshine Sue. This is not really considered a disability, but you can emulate what your website might look like with a high sunshine environment. So they've just put the contrast up really high, adjusted the brightness a little bit, and add just a little bit of blurring to simulate what your website can look like under high sunny conditions. I think this is more important for testing maybe mobile friendliness. People are more likely to browse the internet on mobile devices in the sun. But yeah, that's interesting that they've included that simulator. Hyperactive Henny gets a bit overloaded. And okay, so it's just adding like pop-ups and extra distractions to emulate what it's like being in a hyperactive situation. I imagine that it's got noise as well, but I'm not playing the audio. That's it's interesting how they try to simulate that overload of sentences. So it could be interesting to explore that one. That what might be fine for a neurotypical type of person can cause overload. Trying to prevent that overload from happening is a tricky one. But I guess trying to avoid having too many noises or pop-ups or things in the background, or a whole bunch of different colours could probably help this. I'd have to do a bit more research into this one to see how you can and try and not cause overloadness. And then we also have Keyboard Kim. You can emulate Keyboard Kim by pressing tab. Your website should be navigatable just using tabs. So this is so if people don't have the use of a mouse, being able to tab through a website is pretty useful. And Robot Robin can find some issues automatically. What does he find? Okay. There's no oh, so he can annotate images without alt text. It's cool. Okay. Link text about is unclear. Huh. Okay. Cool. Well, that was a brief intro into accessibility. Accessibility is really important. There's a bunch more you can read up about it. Hopefully that gave you some ideas in how to test for it as well. I consider it a bit of a low-hanging fruit. It's pretty easy to find accessibility bugs, but it can be hard to get those bugs prioritized when there's so much other dev work that's been happening. So thanks for joining me this evening. I hope you have a good time. See ya.